Do you ever feel like the more you reach for closeness in your marriage, the more your partner tends to pull away? Or maybe you're the one who feels a bit smothered. And the harder you try to create some space for yourself, the more your partner tends to invade that space and try to get in. That's the very classic attachment cycle of anxious and avoidant. And honestly, it leaves you both feeling frustrated, misunderstood, and both wondering if real intimacy is even possible. Like, is this the right person for you? Today, I'll show you exactly why this anxious avoidant dance happens. It's so common in relationship and why we're so drawn to each other, why it's so hard to break, and most importantly, what you can do to finally build the secure connection with the partner you already have in a way that feels good to both of you. I'm Eric McDougall. I coach men and couples every single week through this exact cycle. And honestly, I've lived it myself in my marriage with Kate. We used to lean in that anxious avoidant. I was anxious. She definitely was more avoidant. And we had to learn these tools the hard way. And now I want to share them with you so you don't have to make the same mistakes and feel close and connected to your partner again. Now, the first real dichotomy to understand is that this is a classic matter of one partner wanting closeness and one partner wanting space. And we call this emotional gridlock. Like, what are you supposed to do with that? The more that the one partner, who's typically anxious, pushes for closeness, the more it repels the other partner to pull away. And it's exhausting, leaves you both feeling totally alone. Now, what I really want you both to understand is that no one's doing anything inherently wrong here. If you're playing the blame game and you're blaming it on your partner or they're blaming it on you, you've already lost. You're already in that disconnection cycle that's going to leave you feeling alone, frustrated, and lacking intimacy. And if you instead shift your frame to understanding that these styles of attachment, whether you're anxious or whether you're avoidant, are actually protection strategies. They were learned from a very long time ago in order to create security within our closest relationships. Then you can start to understand how these adaptations show up still in your current relationships and how they're maladaptive, as in they're not working anymore, to get you the type of connection you want. So really shifting from, hey, this is a character flaw that you have, or there's something wrong with you, to, hey, I totally get that you're protecting yourself and I honor that, helps you both move towards collaboration so you can each get the type of love that you want and deserve, which is really what we all want, right? To feel secure, connected, and intimate in a relationship that feels pleasurable, connected, and fulfilling for each of us. Now, if you're the anxious partner, leaning a little more towards anxious, right? What that looks like is you're probably constantly wondering, when you can get close. You're trying to have these deep conversations about your relationship. You want more time together. You want more closeness. You want to have more fun. Really, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get in, right? You love togetherness, closeness. And that probably comes from, when you grew up, you might have had a caretaker, oftentimes a parent, a mother or a father, who did give you some of that love that you wanted, but it was very inconsistent. And so over time, what your brain does is starts to recognize that when that you receive that hit of love, it's like, oh, take that, take advantage of that, try to hold on to it because you don't know where it's going to go and when it's going to be available again in the future. And so that inconsistency, that push and pull dynamic that you felt growing up of, hey, is dad going to come home and be really loving tonight? Or is he going to come home and be really mad? Or, hey, is mom going to give me a 2-minute good night tonight? Or is she going to hang out with me for 30 minutes? Right? And if there's a lot of inconsistency to that, it leads you to feeling a little bit anxious and being really on guard for when love is available and how you can grab it, right? You essentially have this fear constantly of losing connection or that creating distance in your relationship. Now, if you're more of the avoidant, right, typically what happens is one of two things. Either you were overwhelmed by a caretaker, a parent who was very invasive, right? Maybe they always tried to get in. They all tried to understand what you were saying. They were always up in your business, for lack of a better term. And they didn't really know how to give you that space that you wanted and needed to self-regulate. Or it's possible that your parent just wasn't around, right? You just didn't have a caretaker who could fulfill your needs. Maybe there was a lot of neglect. Maybe they were there physically, but not emotionally. But really what you learned over time was that love is not safe. Right? Being intimately close to a person is not safe, either because the intimacy is invasive and I kind of lose myself and I get overwhelmed by it, or I can't let it in because it's only a matter of time before I'm going to be abandoned again, right? That I cannot trust love because it's not going to stick around for a long time. At some point, it's just going to leave. And so what that creates is this dynamic where you don't trust genuine intimacy. Either it's too overwhelming for you to receive, or you don't want to let it in because you're afraid to be hurt. And so when you get two people into this relationship, right, there's a lot of attraction there. And there's for a lot of reasons. Typically, as humans, we're drawn to things we lack, right? So if you think about the anxious partner, if you're the anxious partner in a relationship, when you met your partner who maybe was a bit more avoidant, you probably admired their calmness, their independence, their ability to go their own way, to stand up on their own 2 feet, to just be like my way or the highway. I can do what I want. They're probably very outspoken, right? They probably take care of their own needs. And so that is something that the anxious is attracted to in the avoidant, because typically the anxious doesn't have some of those things. They don't have any strong boundaries. They don't have a lot of independence. They can't stand on their own 2 feet. They're always worried about what everybody else is thinking. Now, if you're the avoidant, right, you typically admire the care, the openness, the closeness, the passion that the anxious partner typically has, the ability to just be together so freely. And so you're attracted to that and you move closer to that. But over time, you've kind of moved closer with your partner and you've become attracted and you come into a relationship. But then what happens is living with that consistently becomes a trigger for you. It becomes too much. So your partner's independence now, which was very attractive in the beginning, now leads you to feel alone or disconnected, right? Because when they want to be independent, you feel left on your own. Or if you're the avoidant partner, that passion, that fire, that kind of, caring and loving that was constantly there, that you loved from your maybe anxious counterpart in the beginning, is now overwhelming for you. It's too much. You can't get space anymore. They're always around. They're always taking care of your needs, right? And so there's not a night where you can spend on your own. And so that now in relationship has become something that's detrimental, which leads to this very unhealthy push-pull dynamic. And so what typically happens real time, right? If you think about, you might find yourself experiencing this in relationship, is you're just kind of existing. And then the anxious partner starts to feel a bit disconnected, right? So that kind of anxiety rises and it's like, hey, I haven't talked to my partner in a little bit. Maybe we haven't texted today, or they've been busy for the last couple of days at night and I really haven't seen them or got the connection I wanted. And that kind of creates this story now in that partner's head, in the anxious partner's head, who's like, hey, I need to reach out to them. I need to connect with them. I need to bring closeness. And there's a lot of different ways they do that, right? Maybe they text them 5 times a day. Maybe they're like, hey, I need to talk with you. Hey, can we hang out tonight? Hey, we never do this. Hey, we never do that. Maybe they want to have deep, hard conversations about their relationship, right? There's all kinds of things that the anxious partner is going to do to try to create closeness, whether it's healthy or not, right? In the context of the relationship. Now, what's going to happen is as they do that, the partner who leans more avoidant is going to be a bit overwhelmed by that, right? There's going to be a bit of engulfment. They're going to be like, oh, wow, this is a lot. Receiving 5 texts at once is a lot. You wanting to hang out with me consistently for the next 3 days is a lot for me, right? So what that happens is they kind of move away from it. Maybe they don't answer the texts. Maybe they just stick to conversations that are very surface level. Maybe they just tell their partner they're busy or they're in their phone all the time in order to avoid the closeness that the anxious partner is trying to get. As you can imagine, the anxious partner doesn't typically like this. So what do? Well, they turn on the accelerator and they say, hey, okay, fine. You're being avoidant. I'm going to do more. I'm going to try more. I'm going to push more, which inevitably leads the avoidant partner to want to deflect more, avoid more, and really start leaving it. I don't know. I don't know what I want. I don't know what's going on. I'm busy. I have things to do. I have work to do. I'm meeting with a friend. I'm sorry. And over time, what happens in these dynamics is the anxious partner comes up with all kinds of creative ways to try to get the connection they want. And the avoidant starts to come up with all kinds of creative ways to avoid intimacy and avoid closeness, right? And so you end up with this dynamic where 2 people are playing at a very high level, this anxious avoidant game, which is totally unhealthy. And I'll tell you a story in my own marriage. This was part of it as well. About 5 years ago, Kate and I were in this deep in this dynamic. I leaned much more anxious. Kate was avoidant. And so the way that I describe it is Kate just seemed kind of okay with us just existing. That was like my story in my head, that she was just like a transactional relationship where we just raise kids and never really connect is totally okay with me. That was anxiety creating for me. I was like, what do you mean? Am I going to be like this forever? Am I going to be like this forever? right? And so I was getting all this kind of anxious feeling within me. And so what happened is then I would pursue. And the way that I would pursue oftentimes was a little soft, right? Trying to feel like, hey, maybe we can hang out. And she was telling me some stressors. So I would go into overdrive and kind of remove all her stressors to make sure that those weren't excuses and those weren't getting in the way of us hanging out. And then inevitably, because she was avoidant, she would find more distractions. And so we hung out in this cycle where it was like, okay, well, the more stressors I take off your plate, the more you go and find more stressors. So I was getting angry because I was exhausted because I was taking all her stressors on. I was still living my life, but I had this like covert contract of like, hey, if I can get rid of all your stressors, then you'll be available for me. Not knowing that to Kate, that availability was very intimidating to her. She didn't want to be available to me all the time. She wanted to keep her own sense of autonomy. And so she would just find new things to keep her busy. And so then I started to get frustrating. So when that didn't work, I moved on to, we got to talk. We'd have the relationship talk all the time. How do I get her to talk about relationship? We have to talk about relationship. We have to talk about sex life. We have to talk about where we're going. We have to talk about our marriage. We have to talk about our connection. And as you can imagine, those conversations for Kate, who was a little more avoidant, those conversations were annoying and she wanted to avoid them at all costs. They were not pleasurable. They were not enjoyable. They did not lead to the connection she wanted. They were exhausting. And after a while, they became a waste of time for her. It was like, Eric, I'm tired of you just replaying the script where you're unhappy. Go do something about it. It's not my responsibility to make you happy. I don't know what to do. I'm too busy. And so as you can imagine, now we're in this gridlock where every time I try to talk to her about something, she shuts me down or she avoids or she says, I don't know. And the more she does that, the more I feel angry. And after a while, I was kind of becoming apathetic. I was just accepting my reality. I guess it's always going to be like this. And then I remember at some point, I kind of got fed up. And this is what happens in a lot of relationships, right? Typically, the anxious partner finally has had enough. They're like, okay, well, this is clearly not working. My needs aren't getting met. Things aren't going well. So what do? Probably a lot like I did. You stop pursuing. You stop going after it. You stop moving towards what you want. And you start to create this space, this distant, right? This kind of waning, if you will, like two ships just growing more and more apart. Now, whether that's, you starting to talk about the end of the relationship, whether that's you just kind of giving up on pursuing, whether that's you just kind of living these two independent lives, right? Being roommates, being in a very transactional relationship. Whatever your version of that is, what happens, just like it happened with Kate, is the avoidant partner starts to feel the distance. And when they feel that distance, one of their biggest fears comes up. Their deep down fear that just sits in the shadow, which is they are afraid to be abandoned. Their fear of abandonment is actually more intense than their fear of engulfment. And so in that moment, what typically happens is the avoidant partner then will lean in. And you might have seen this before, right? You might be the one that's like, hey, this is not working. I'm thinking about ending the relationship. If this continues this way, I just can't do this anymore. All of a sudden, your partner's just like, I'm here. I'm ready. Let's do it, right? Let's hang out. And now you're having dates, you're hanging out and everything till inevitably you end up back in the same situation. Now, what happens though in that moment and why it's so intoxicating for the anxious partner is that the roles flip. Right? The anxious partner who's like, okay, I'm kind of done with this. I'm not pursuing anymore. That leads to the avoidant partner feeling the gap, being afraid that now it's like, okay, you're calling my bluff now, right? And now I'm going to feel abandoned. So I'm going to step in. So they step in, the roles switch. Now it's like, ooh, this is great for the anxious partner. They're kind of like, wow, this is different. They're kind of pursuing me. This is great. The avoidant partner is doing it from a place of fear of like, okay, I can't let them go too far or else I'm going to be alone, which is like my worst thing. And so now the relationship for a couple months feels kind of great. It's like, this is sweet. So you get that hit, you get that hope, you get all that kind of stuff. You both want connection, right? But what happens inevitably over time is you end up in the same cycle again. And you end up in a relationship where the only way that the connection happens is when the anxious partner puts in some sort of threat and the avoidant partner responds out of fear to create connection for a limited amount of time until finally things are good again. The anxious partner feels good and satiated, and then the avoidant partner is ready to drift off again until inevitably that happens again later. And this is a cycle that some couples find themselves in years. This is what I found myself in with Kate till finally I said, okay, something has to change. Now, what I really want both of you to understand, if you're both listening to this as partners, is you both want connection. It just looks different for each of you. And this is kind of a trap that we get into, right? Like we think that everybody else wants connection in the same way that we do. I think like, oh, like I want a fulfilling sexual relationship where we have sex all the time, we connect and we have deep conversations and we're playful and laughing. And that's the type of connection that I want. So isn't that the type of connection that everybody wants? And of course, that's not true. We're different. Kate and I are very different. I'm different than everybody else on this planet. And so inevitably what happens is we both want connection, but it looks different. And then we have to understand what different looks like. And ways to create that is to collaborate and have conversations about what healthy connection looks like for you. Now, if you're the anxious partner, after you share that and your partner knows that, there's some things that you have to start doing and stop doing, right? You have to stop just pursuing constantly whenever you're feeling anxious, right? You have to learn to regulate your body. You have to bring in breath work, bring in walking, bring in exercising, cold plunges, things like that to regulate your nervous system. A huge part of the problem, if you're the anxious partner, is that whenever you're like, oh my God, we're not feeling connected, that thought takes over and then runs your actions. But what you want to do instead is that thought's going to come in and you're going to be like, yo, chill out. We just connected like 2 days ago. It felt awesome. I'm okay. Everything's fine. You know what I mean? We're going to connect later on today. It's cool. And then you end up like calming yourself down, learning to regulate yourself. So doing this and learning how to regulate yourself and practice the art of embodiment, like breathing, movement, integration with your nervous system, cold water therapy, all that stuff is really, really important. The next is building your own inner kind of recognition system to build the solid, flexible self, right? So we talk a lot about differentiation in the work that I do. How can I be more of myself and be in relationship with my partner? And part of this is that you need to essentially create your own fuel for self-esteem, your own fuel for self-confidence. And that's by piling on your own wins, getting clear about, hey, here's what my wins are every day, thinking about gratitude around that, being grateful for yourself. That builds you up. And so in those anxious thoughts, when you're like, oh, my partner doesn't like me, they don't want to do anything, like, no, that's not true. I'm awesome. My partner loves me. Here's evidence of that. Here's evidence of how awesome I am. And you're able to essentially prevent yourself from like digging you into a hole and then needing your partner to pull you out of it through some sort of love, affection, etc., which kind of looks like neediness sometimes, right? And I'm not saying that it's not okay to have needs, but it sometimes can look like neediness. The next thing is to be clean and clear with your requests. Be specific. Keep it short. I've seen so many anxious partners that instead of asking, hey, I love to spend time with you tonight. Do you want to watch Yellowstone tonight at 7 p.m.? They have to give like a 3-page document on how they're feeling, what's going on for them, why it's important to have connection, all the studies and data that backs it up. And you've already lost your avoidant partner. It's already too much for them. They're already exhausted with that conversation. So be clear, be direct with your requests, and allow your partner to respond in whatever way feels good to them, and then honor their request so that next time they can feel like they can be real with you, right? Which is so important towards a relationship because all transformation starts with that truth. Then the next thing is think about your boundaries. And this is really important because when we talk about boundaries, we often think about external boundaries, right? Which is like, how do I protect myself and my limits from the world in order to be in a healthy relationship, right? So of course, like a boundary would be like, if your partner's being aggressive and talking down to you and insulting you, you should have a boundary that says, hey, I'm not going to be spoken to like this. Please stop speaking to me like this or I'm going to walk away. If they continue, you just walk away. And then you say, hey, I'll be back in 10 minutes. See if you calm down. That great example of an external boundary. Now you have internal boundaries as well. And this is internal boundaries, which is how do you protect the outside world from you? So in this case, right, because you can't trust yourself because sometimes you're emotional. And so in this case, that might be a boundary of, I am not going to text my partner more than once a day, or I'm not going to text my partner more than twice a week, right? Especially if you live together. Because I've seen people who like, they text their partner 19 times a day. And I can imagine, even me, I'm kind of a little more anxious, but it's like, man, that would be overwhelming receiving 19 texts from my partner in a single day. And I get it, but the reality is maybe that's a boundary for you to be like, hey, I'm going to wait till my partner gets home to communicate with them. Or I'm going to use one text to share how I feel and what I think instead of 19 texts. And that would be an example of an internal boundary that you can have. And lastly, if you're the anxious partner, one of the really important things here is to make sure that you have a support system outside of your relationship. The reason oftentimes this dynamic is so detrimental for relationships is that the anxious partner only leans on their spouse, on their married partner, who's often avoidant, to fulfill all their needs. And that is way too much for any human being, never mind an avoidant partner. And so you really need to expand your support system. How are you, leaning in emotionally with your friends? How are you sharing your challenges with the people you love and trust? How are you being open about your insecurities with people you love, right? You need to be able to uh, extend beyond your marriage in order to have a healthy support system. So that way you can feel fulfilled and bring the best self to your marriage, right? So that you're not coming off as, hey, I need you to be okay for me to be okay, or I need you to love me for me to feel loved, right? But instead, you're like, I am full and I'm complete and awesome. And I have this great support system that supports me. And I want to be in a healthy relationship with you. And if right now you're not okay, it's okay. I have other ways that I can fulfill my needs, which is really important to think about. Now, if we switch and think about tools for the avoidant partner, well, the first thing is taking initiative with repair. This is like one of the game changers if you're an avoidant partner. And it's actually really simple. This is something that Kate does really well, is typically after a disconnection cycle, if you as the avoidant partner are the first to step in and lead the olive branch and say, hey, I'm sorry that I shut down there. I'm sorry that I wasn't available to you there. I'm sorry that I wasn't listening, etc. That move is going to create so much security and closeness for your partner that they are going to be satisfied 90% of the time with closeness, because that's really what they're looking for. And especially in a moment where they feel the most disconnected, for you to step in first and honor that and repair your mistake and make a commitment to moving forward, that is going to have a huge impact on the security of the relationship. The next thing is, if you do need space, right, which is totally normal. It's totally normal that you need some space. It's totally normal that you do not want to hang out with your partner 7 days a week in a row. Okay. That's totally normal. Now, if you do want that space, be specific about what that looks like. Hey, Saturday morning, I'm going to need time to myself from 9 to noon. I will be back to have lunch with the kids and you, right? And so that would be an example of you being very specific with your space. That's going to create security for your partner. They're going to say, okay, you're not just leaving all day. You just need space for yourself. And I know when you're going to be back. So therefore, I'm going to feel good. And it's going to make me feel safe and secure that you're coming back at a specific time. Now, make sure you come back at that time. That's really important, right? The other thing is, it's going to be hard for a lot of avoidant partners because they're really great at isolating, but you need to start to ask for help. You need to start letting people in. And I recommend, again, I know how hard this can be, but if it's not letting your partner in right away, let in people you love and trust, and let them in a real way. Like, be honest. Be honest about your desire to connect with your partner, but that it's too much for you. Be honest about some of your own shortcomings. Be honest about some of the struggles that you've had in your life. Start letting people in to have an intimate relationship. A lot of the problem that I see with avoided partners, who often end up being really high achievers, by the way, is that they suck at asking for help. They're super isolating and they don't let anyone in. Why? Because they don't trust genuine relationships. That's how they grew up. So all their relationships are transactional and are functional to help them create the results that they want. And that is really important to understand if you're an avoidant partner, is what you are seeking is through the discomfort that you want. You want closeness, but that closeness means that you have to walk through openness. Need to walk through being in a relationship with another person. And that's going to be scary for you. And this is like the kind of push and pull dynamic that avoidants feel within themselves. They actually have to go against their programming in order to be in healthy relationship with another. Now, it doesn't mean you need to have a relationship on somebody else's terms. That's not healthy either. But what it does mean is you have to be clear that being in relationship with somebody is good for you. You just need to know what that looks like for you in a way that lands with your partner, right? And so again, there's all these like ways that you can start to understand. I'll give you a few ways here, right? If you think about now moving towards, hey, I want to collaborate with my partner, right? Well, the first thing you can do is you can share this video with them, whether you're the avoidant or the anxious partner. Just share with them. Say, hey, listen to what this guy's talking about. Can we have a conversation about this? Can we just have an open discussion about it? This YouTube channel and our podcast, the Evolved Marriage Podcast, is filled with a lot of insight that you can lean on. And so this might be the first step for you having that conversation. And then start to move into collaboration. Hey, what would feel good for you in terms of connection this week? And be honest, right? You can tell your partner, they can share with you, and then it becomes like a negotiation about how you can have both of your needs met. And it's not, oh, you always do this and you never and all that kind of stuff. Now you're already in disconnection. but instead try to understand what your partner needs, help them understand what you need, and then work together in collaboration to have both those needs being met. And understand that in the beginning, this might be a little hard and awkward, right? It's going to be different and it's going to bring up tension within you. And this is a big part of the problem, especially if you're the anxious partner. You have trouble with experiencing tension within you, but you're going to have to be okay with your partner having some space for themselves, having more autonomy than maybe you would have in your life. And if you're the avoidant partner, you have to be okay with sometimes providing connection that satiates your partner who tends to be a little more anxious in order to make sure that they know that they are loved and that they have value in your life, because that's what they need. And so I really hope that you utilize this video in order to open up this conversation with your partner in order to move towards a securely attached relationship where both of your needs are being met. Because I know it's possible. Kate and I have created it, and it's something that I help my couples do over and over and over again. And as a bonus, if you want a free resource, you can actually just click below and do your own couples assessment. Okay, so this couples assessment is just you answering a few questions. I'll get that information directly. I'll compile an action plan, and me and my team will send it back to you so you have clear action steps that you can take this week in order to create more of the relationship that you and your partner want based on what's going on for you specifically. So go ahead, click that link below, and don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell so that you get notified every time there's a new video to help you make sure the best years of your marriage are ahead of you. Cheers.